So the United States is stuck in Iran right now with no clear path to accomplish our objectives anytime soon. Despite the bluster coming from the White House, it doesn't seem that Washington wants to escalate this conflict to try to force Iran's capitulation, if that's even a viable option. And in 5 months, Iran hasn't given an inch in regards to their denuclearization, their proxies, or missile programs, and have now actually added a new term that they, from here forward, will control the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, some skeptics are now referring to this war as a strategic U.S. defeat, which I personally think is a little premature, but unfortunately, I can see how they got there. So let's get into it. Overnight, President Trump announced that he was calling off the next wave of U.S. strikes because a deal was close at hand. How many times have we heard this at this point? 5, 6, 7, 8? I've lost track. A lot of people have lost track. And the big issue here is that Iran doesn't take these threats at face value anymore. So President Trump earlier today or late last night said, quote, "The USA is locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran at levels of military terror, strength, and power not seen since World War II. Despite this, we have just been asked by Iran and other Middle Eastern countries to hold off any attack and that the parameters of a deal has been agreed to. This would include the immediate, complete, and total opening of the Hormuz Strait and an end to Iran's nuclear threat." Great. All right, take that at face value. That's, it's on the path to victory, right? Let's get that straight back to what it was before the war began. Free and safe passage, no strings attached, and the end of Iran's nuclear threat. I mean, that was one of the key reasons for going to this war in the first place. All right, sign that document. Let's get this thing sorted out. The problem is, when you get into the details, I'm just not sure any of this is real. So Israeli Channel News said that the Iranian foreign minister agreed overnight to a compromise formulated by Qatari and U.S. mediators where vessels entering the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz would be from Iranian territorial waters, and those exiting would be through Omani territorial waters. Now, that sounds an awful lot like Iran having control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is something we're trying to avoid. That's not good. Again, that's their new term that Iran has added to the negotiations. But I'm not going to spend any more time digging down that rabbit hole because I don't think it's real. I mean, in that same article, the Fars news agency, Iranian news agency, rejected the claim, saying, quote, "There is no agreement whatsoever regarding the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the reports published on the subject are false. As long as the U.S. continues its aggressive actions, the Strait of Hormuz will remain blocked, and the passage of vessels will be possible only on the declared routes and with the permission of the Revolutionary Guard's naval force." We are in a spot right now that I hate, and it's that I trust the Iranian assessments of these negotiations more than those of the United States. To be clear, Iran has made some wild claims from the beginning of this conflict about the shooting down of countless F-35s, and regularly they state that U.S. casualties are through the roof, like into the thousands, and aircraft carriers getting hit and all that. But when you look at their statements around the diplomatic track, who's taking part, when the talks are happening, what has been agreed upon or not, historically, from the beginning of this conflict, the Iranian assessments have been much closer to reality than those from the United States. Because on the U.S. side, it's constantly overly optimistic. We're right on the verge of, this one, opening the Strait of Hormuz and ending the Iranian nuclear program. Really, just like that. Just took another threat of carrying out strikes in Iran, and they ceded on like the number one issue. That's crazy, right? Historically, over the last 5, coming on 6 months now, Iran's statements that these things are not in the negotiations, they have not agreed on these things, and they have not given in any number of regards, has proven to be much more accurate. Now, one of the issues here with all of this is that it's not just our allies and some here in the United States that kind of laugh off these threats. Iran does too. So we're losing leverage in these negotiations the more times we make these threats and then don't follow through. Benjamin Taleblu of Foundation for Defense of Democracy says, quote, "Tehran is likely to see this one way, Trump backing down, and that's dangerous." Now, when you step back and look at it, it really appears like the United States does not want to escalate the conflict in Iran. And I can understand why. It comes with significant cost. I mean, for one, we do appear to have a shortage of defensive munitions. We definitely have fewer than when we started this conflict. And as we talked about in a recent video, whether you agree with the CSIS assessment of 800 Patriot interceptors remaining or not, we certainly have fewer. And the more we go all in with Iran, the more we are borrowing from the future and saying this conflict right now is more important than whatever might come up in the next 2, 3, 4 years, because it's going to take a long time to backfill that shortage. So that's one, no doubt. The other thing here is all of our regional allies are taking a beating, right? There's a number of facilities throughout the Middle East that are not as well protected as U.S. bases. Even the U.S. bases in Jordan recently have been on the receiving end of Iranian missiles that have gotten through U.S. air defense and killed American service members, so it's not without cost there either. But our allies in the region recognize that if we really ramp it up against Iran, they are going to be on the receiving end, which is probably why President Trump in his statement said that they heard from a number of our allies throughout the Middle East. What did he say? We've just been asked by Iran and other Middle Eastern countries to hold off any attack. Yeah, because Iran still has the missile and drone capabilities to carry out significant strikes throughout the region. And they're not really trusting that we are actually going to follow through with our threats. And we don't have to go back very far to find this. Just on July 22nd, President Trump said that for every ship hit by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, we are going to bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant, including those located next to or in the capital city of Tehran. Guess what didn't change? Strikes on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Right, according to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Organization, they just put out some warnings saying on July 31st, a ship was struck by an unknown projectile. August 1st, a tanker reported seeing a large splash and explosion in close proximity. Throughout the last 10 days or so, since President Trump issued that threat, we've seen a number of tankers be turned around, not fired upon, but turned around by the IRGC. So they hear these threats and they just don't take them at face value anymore. That has a serious impact on our negotiating stance. So again, it's pretty clear Iran has not given in on any of the key issues we started this war. Let's walk through them real quick. The nuclear program, no concessions that I've been able to see or even are being presented at the negotiating table. In fact, there's some arguments right now that the new Iranian regime is more likely to pursue a nuclear weapon based off these past 5 months than Khamenei was at the start of the war before he was killed. The proxy forces. Nothing really has happened there. In fact, there was some reporting just a couple days ago that Iran used the ceasefire to meet with their proxy forces and discuss what a coordinated attack against the United States would look like if hostilities resumed. They're still there. All right. And the Houthis just within the last couple weeks kicked off a blockade of Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. So the Iranian proxy forces still there, certainly not defeated or gone by any stretch of the imagination. The missiles, yes, we've hit a number of launchers. We've likely buried a fair amount underground, but in recent days, we have seen that Iran still has the ability to launch enough of these missiles to get through, if nothing else, U.S. air defense at strategic locations throughout the Middle East. That's a problem. So the missile program's still there. The proxy forces are still there. The nuclear program's not being addressed. And of course, now we have the added little variable of the Strait of Hormuz. All of this is leading to some analysts referring to this as a strategic defeat. This was an article the New York Times will have published in the link in the description below, where they say to America's allies, President Trump's war on Iran, now in its 6th month, seems headed for a strategic defeat. They quoted Robert Niblett, the former director of the Chatham House, who called it a strategic loss and an embarrassment, adding, quote, for U.S. allies and for those who rely on the U.S. for security, this is confirmation that you cannot trust the United States. People won't forget that their security and their future were dragged into question by an unpredictable and wavering U.S. foreign policy. Ali Vaez, the Iran project director for the International Crisis Group, said, quote, this is the crisis of credibility of the United States. Neither its military prowess nor its diplomatic promises can be trusted. And Aaron David Miller, a former American negotiator and now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, said the conflict, quote, has undermined U.S. deterrence and credibility, antagonized America's allies, and delighted its adversaries. Now, you kind of expect some pushback on anything President Trump does from the New York Times. I get it. But we're seeing this from across the aisle right now. We've seen more criticism on Fox News, more criticism from some of the independent outlets on the right. Mark Dubowitz, FDD, and no doubt an Iran hawk, kind of called all of this back in May. And he just re-upped this a few days ago. So again, Dubowitz talking about what to expect if we went down the path we are currently headed down. Quote, if President Trump agrees to a 60-day ceasefire extension based on vague Iranian promises to discuss nuclear issues, it's game over. That pushes the crisis into late July or early August, when major military operations become far less likely ahead of the midterms. Once the military leverage disappears, meaningful nuclear concessions disappear with it. Ballistic missile restrictions will be non-existent. Iran will get billions in sanctions relief while repeatedly using Hormuz as a tool of blackmail. Tehran will have won at the negotiating table what it lost on the battlefield. That seems pretty spot on. Is that not exactly where we are right now? We're into August, right? The beginning part of August here, and it does look like military operations are less and less likely. We've seen probably 2 or 3 kind of walkbacks in recent weeks. And in turn, we have Hormuz being used as a tool of blackmail. Dubowitz, that I think he nailed it there. That's exactly where we sit right now. Now, something I do want to stress is this isn't black or white, right? We send 100,000 troops on the ground to invade Iran, or we walk away with our tail between our legs and it's a strategic defeat. There's a ton of gray area and different routes that could be taken. One of those that still could be pursued is the blockade. I would argue that the blockade, first off, it is having an impact on Iran, will continue to have an impact on Iran. I would argue that it probably would have been more effective carrying that out before hostilities began, because in the middle of a war, it's just kind of hard in the Iranian resolve. And if we look at the economic sanctions placed on Russia during their war with Ukraine, yes, it has an impact. No, it didn't in the war. And it's not something that happens fast. So maybe over time, though, the blockade and the sanctions could have a serious impact on Iran and maybe get them to concede on certain aspects. But to think that right now, in the middle of a shooting war, is going to get them to surrender, it's just not realistic. And in the meantime, Iran's going to be able to hold on to that. As we blockade Iranian ships, their shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz is probably going to inflict more pain and damage on the U.S. and the international economy than we are willing to sustain than they are over that same period of time. So overall, not a lot of good options. And increasingly, it looks like the only path out of this is to cut a bad deal, a deal that honestly would not have been on the table, even considered just a few months ago. We need that time to be able to regroup, to rebuild our stockpiles, and rethink a strategy going forward, be it with Iran or anyone else, because what is playing out right now is not good. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.